The comfort and simplicity of use of the tiny Fulmar aircraft made Captain Eric Winkle Brown adore it. In the early 1940s, the aircraft safeguarded Britain's naval fleets despite its meticulous management. It was a cherished and reliable aircraft that took part in the pursuit of the notorious German battleship Bismarck and shot down many Italian bombers during the North African War. The beautiful Fulmar, which was born out of the conflict between the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, is still a cherished and reliable aircraft. With its wings being slashed by the Royal Air Force, the Fleet Air Arm faced a dilemma in the 1930s. Because of Germany's lack of aircraft carriers and the geopolitical shifts that followed, Britain sought to prevent a serious threat from sea fighters. Heavy weaponry with a long range and the capacity to cross erratic seas, especially at night or in bad weather, became the primary focus instead. The Royal Air Force, who desired to manage naval aircraft, questioned the Royal Navy's confidence that land-based aircraft could handle aerial threats. In the 1930s, the Royal Navy suffered greatly as a result of this bureaucratic negligence, giving rise to aircraft such as the Blackburn Skua and Rock naval aircraft. The creation of the Blackburn naval fighters, Skua fighter dive bomber, and Rock turreted fighter was considered as a major step towards changing naval combat. When the British Royal Navy was ordered to build aircraft to confront the Germans' cutting-edge bombers and fighters in the early 1940s, they were faced with a formidable challenge. The fleet had to be prepared to receive a new fighter, since the German threat revealed a significant capability gap. Fighters with the ability to pursue reconnaissance aircraft, escort bombers, and perform reconnaissance tasks themselves were the ambition of the Royal Navy. They also required radios, direction-finding equipment, catapults, arrestor hooks, sophisticated landing gear, and navigational instruments. In order to traverse the skies and handle the equipment, the Royal Navy also attempted to induct naval observers with training. Because of their intrinsic limitations, fleet fighters were frequently seen as obsolete in the age of cutting-edge technologies and strategic planning. The Royal Navy mainly relied on fleet carriers with weapons tucked behind armor decks, because to their suspicion about carrier-based finders, the voices from the field, those who had touched the sky and tasted the salt of the oceans, objected with the Admiralty's consideration of equipping its new armored carriers with attack aircraft. The theory behind the Royal Navy's plan was that land-based squadrons would always be stronger than fleet fighters. The Royal Air Force Gladiator was a single-seat biplane converted for naval service that was used by the Royal Navy. In addition to providing a training avenue, these Sea Gladiators protected Royal Naval air stations from enemy attacks. They also gave pilots a taste of what fighter planes could do. But the Lone-Range Zerstorer Me-110 fighter, an already perfected German aircraft, was not available to the RAF. A ray of hope appeared in spite of these obstacles when the British modified the RAF Gladiator. An attempt to strengthen the RAF's ferry fighting force gave rise to the famous light bomber known as the Fulmar. Even though the program was terminated early, Ferry's prototype P-434's fast light bomber proved to be a viable answer. Together with Ferry's contribution, the P-434 was a dive bomber that was developed following a specification from the British Air Ministry. The Hawker Henley and an audacious Gloucester design joined it. The competitor Henley began at a scorching 300 miles per hour, but the P-434 outperformed it with a top speed of 284 miles per hour. A new fighter for Needle Night, the P-434 Reborn was redesigned and reforged to take on the particular demands of maritime warfare. The requirement for a two-seater fleet defense fighter for observation and fleet defense was highlighted in Specification 0838. Captain Eric Winkle Brown, a World War II test pilot, pointed out that the fighter was necessary for the presence of a navigator and radio operator. It was one of the hairiest experiences ever to be seated in the observer seat of a Fulmar. An improved version of the earlier Fairy battle, called the Fulmar, with a more aerodynamic shape, its movable wings were 16 inches shorter. The prototype P-434, designated K5099, was flown for the first time by test pilot Chris Stannonland on January 13, 1937. A few little modifications later, the tail was 8 inches higher. In 1938, the Fulmar's promise was acknowledged with an official name. A total of 127 units of the Rolls-Royce Merlin III-powered prototype were ordered. Its initial travels, meanwhile, were unimpressive since it barely reached 230 miles per hour. The group started from scratch to build a new power plant. The Fulmar aircraft's performance was intended to be improved by the Merlin 8 engine, particularly for missions conducted at low altitude. At 7,500 feet, the Fulmar prototype increased its speed 265 miles per hour. For the naval force, Britain required cutting-edge fighters, and the Fulmar's performance was deemed enough. By mid-1938, the Royal Navy intended to have an outstanding fleet of 127 Fulmars. The shadow of World War II dashed the Danish Navy's hopes of building the aircraft under license. The Fulmar prototype was a model that already existed. The Royal Air Force, runway Manchester, the Fairy, the first production aircraft, took to the skies, marking an important milestone in the aircraft's history. The little interval between first production delivery and first combat missions highlighted the fundamental correctness of the aircraft. The 1940 introduced Fulmar earns its own place in aviation history, even if by 1945 the Corsair Hellcat and Seafire had become the dominant late-war aircraft. During naval battles in the Mediterranean, it became known for defending fleets and convoys. The two-seater Fulmar aircraft made its debut in 1940 when the Fleet Air Arm's Fulmar Squadron was established by the HMS Illustrious. The Fulmar's superiority over swift single-seaters was its long range. Even though it was heavier and less nimble, it was strategically important for fracking in 1941. Convoys that were being besieged by Malta were guarded by the Fulmar during the battle in North Africa. It demonstrated its air superiority by bringing down 10 Italian aircraft by October 1940. At the Battle of Cape Matapan, the Italian battleship Vittorio Veneto squared off against Fulmar. It also supported the EF operation against Axis installations and Arctic convoys. Its downfall was predicted when it fought the fleet-footed Mitsubishi A6M Zero in the Pacific in 1942. Whose flaws were stark and which caused 6 of its ships to sink. The world saw the debut of the upgraded Fulmar Mark II, which could carry bombs or fuel and had a Merlin 30 engine, in January 1941. In October 1941, it showed off its amazing 1,100-mile range, and in June 1942, it proved that it could bomb targets safely by delivering a 500-pound payload between dives. As part of a bigger plan to fortify convoy defenses, some formulas were fired straight from merchant vessel catapults. Throughout the Mediterranean by 1942, the British Fulmar fighter was supplanted by modern, nimble aircraft such as the British Hawker, American Grumman Martlet, and British Sea Hurricane. The Fulmar found fresh life in training and reconnaissance, although it was no longer a primary fighter and continued to guard Malta convoys. After 20 squadrons were outfitted, it turned into a crucial component of naval aviation, taking down 112 adversary planes and rising to the top of the Fleet Air Arm's victory chart. About 100 Fulmars were converted as night fighters by February 1945, but their success rate was very moderate. This marked the end of the Fulmar's frontline days. Pilots loved the Fulmar despite its shortcomings because of its great fuel capacity, outstanding deck handling, and pleasant flying style. In the cockpit of a Fulmar, many of the fleet's aces, including Sub-Lieutenant Jackie Sewell and Stanley, discovered their aces. A fleet of 600 Fulmars was completed by the last one. Captain Brown pointed out that the Fulmar might not have the same glitter as single-seat fighters, since its inherent skill and soundness did not make enough news to draw attention from the general public.